The underworld knew Daniel Corvino as a ghost who left nothing but blood in his wake. But to his traumatized, silent 1-year-old daughter, he was just a desperate father, until the night she shattered the silence, pointing a tiny finger at a terrified waitress and uttering a single word, Mama. L'Osteria del Cardinale was not the sort of restaurant that catered to the general public. Tucked away in the cobblestone labyrinth of Boston's North End, it was an establishment built on discretion, thick oak doors, and the quiet understanding that the men dining in the private booths ran the city. The air smelled rich, heavy with white truffles, slow-roasted garlic, and the metallic tang of concealed firearms. Daniel Corvino sat in the corner booth, a fortress of shadows and mahogany. At 32, he was the undisputed head of the Corvino Syndicate. He was a man carved from cold marble, possessing a ruthless intelligence that had kept him alive through 2 turf wars and countless assassination attempts. But tonight, the don of the city's most feared crime family was utterly defeated by a toddler pushing pureed carrots around a porcelain bowl. Mia, his 1-year-old daughter, sat in a high chair beside him. She was a tiny, fragile thing with dark, sorrowful eyes that had seen far too much. 8 months ago, a rival faction had planted C4 beneath the chassis of his wife's SUV. Isabella had died instantly. Mia, strapped into her reinforced car seat in the back, had survived the blast with barely a scratch. But the explosion had taken more than her mother. It had taken her voice. Since that afternoon of twisting metal and fire, Mia had not made a single sound. No crying, no babbling, no laughter. The top pediatric neurologists in the country had diagnosed it as severe trauma-induced aphasia. They told Daniel to be patient. Daniel, however, did not have patience. He had power. And for the first time in his life, his power was completely useless. Sienna Brooks wiped her sweaty palms on her black apron, taking a deep, shaky breath before picking up the silver serving tray. She was exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep and entirely too much caffeine. She was working a double shift, her third this week, trying desperately to scrape together enough cash to keep her older brother, Toby, from getting his kneecaps shattered by the Irish mob. Toby had a gambling problem, and Declan Foley's debt collectors were not known for their leniency. Sienna had strict instructions from the maître, table 4. No eye contact, do not linger, pour the water, serve the veal, and walk away. She approached the booth, her heart hammering against her ribs. 2 massive men in tailored suits, Rocco and Matteo, stood a few feet away, their eyes tracking her every micro-movement. Sienna kept her gaze lowered as she stepped up to the table. "Excuse me, sir," Sienna murmured, her voice soft but steady, the veal Milanese. She smoothly placed the dish before Daniel, catching a brief glimpse of his sharp jawline and cold, slate-grey eyes. As she turned to refill his water glass, her hip bumped the edge of the table. The jolt knocked a small silver spoon off the edge. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. Rocco's hand instantly drifted beneath his suit jacket. Daniel didn't flinch, but his eyes locked onto Sienna with the intensity of a predator assessing a threat. "I am so sorry," Sienna gasped, immediately dropping to her knees to retrieve the silverware. As she reached for the spoon, her face came level with Mia's high chair. The little girl was staring down at her. Sienna froze for a second, captivated by the sheer sadness in the child's eyes. It was a look no toddler should ever possess. Instinct took over. Sienna forgot the terrifying men standing nearby. She forgot the rules. She simply saw a little girl who looked profoundly lost. Sienna offered a warm, crinkling smile, her green eyes softening. "There you go, sweetheart," she whispered, picking up a plush velvet rabbit that had fallen near the spoon and placing it gently on the tray of the high chair. Her fingertips brushed lightly against Mia's small hand. Mia gasped. It was a sharp, ragged intake of breath that sounded incredibly loud in the hushed dining room. Daniel stiffened. Rocco stopped dead in his tracks. Mia's dark eyes widened, fixated entirely on Sienna's face. The little girl's chest heaved. She raised a tiny, trembling arm, extending her index finger until it was pointing directly at Sienna. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. Then a small, fragile voice broke the 8-month silence. "Ma, ma." The word dropped like a live grenade onto the mahogany table. Sienna's breath hitched in her throat. She looked from the little girl to the terrifying man sitting across the table. Daniel Corvino was staring at his daughter as if she had just performed a miracle, his face pale, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Slowly, agonizingly, Daniel shifted his gaze to Sienna. The look in his eyes made her blood run cold. It wasn't anger. It was a terrifying, obsessive realization. "What did you say your name was?" Daniel asked, his voice, a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in Sienna's chest. "Sienna," she stammered, backing away, clutching the silver tray to her chest like a shield. "Sienna Brooks. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Leave us," Daniel commanded, cutting her off. He didn't raise his voice, but the absolute authority in his tone left no room for argument. Sienna practically fled to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to set the tray down on the prep counter before she dropped it. She spent the rest of her shift hiding in the back, washing dishes she wasn't assigned to wash, terrified that the mob boss was going to drag her out into the alley. But when she finally checked the dining room an hour later, the booth was empty. The only thing left was a pristine $100 bill resting under an untouched glass of water. And Rocco standing silently by the front exit, watching her with dead, unblinking eyes. The Corvino estate sat on 20 acres of heavily wooded land in Weston, surrounded by wrought iron fences and state-of-the-art surveillance. Inside his sprawling, dimly lit study, Daniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the rain, slicking the manicured lawns. In his hand, he held a manila folder, thick with printed documents and photographs. Mateo, his most trusted underboss, stood near the mahogany desk. "Sienna Marie Brooks," Mateo recited, reading from a tablet. 24 years old. Parents died in a multi-car pileup when she was 18. No criminal record. Barely even a parking ticket. She's been working double shifts at L'Osteria for the last month. Daniel didn't turn around. "Why?" "Her brother," Mateo replied, his tone laced with disgust. "Toby Brooks. He's a degenerate gambler. Owes 50 grand to Declan Foley's crew. Foley's boys have been leaving voicemails threatening to put Toby in a wood chipper if he doesn't pay up by Friday." Daniel opened the folder and stared at a surveillance photo of Sienna leaving the restaurant. She didn't look exactly like Isabella. Isabella had possessed a refined, aristocratic Italian beauty. Sienna was softer, more unpolished, with messy auburn hair and startlingly bright green eyes. But looking at her now, Daniel understood what his daughter had seen. It wasn't the physical appearance. It was the warmth, the gentle, unguarded maternal instinct that radiated from her. Isabella had carried that exact same aura. 50,000, Daniel murmured, closing the folder. It was pocket change. "Boss," Mateo ventured cautiously. "She's a civilian. Bringing her into our world, it's a risk. The Foley crew is already looking for her brother. We are currently maintaining a fragile truce with the Irish. If we interfere with their collections..." "I don't care about Declan Foley," Daniel snapped, his voice cracking like a whip as he turned to face Mateo. "My daughter spoke, Mateo. 8 months of doctors, therapists, and absolute silence, and she spoke to a waitress in a dirty apron. I am not letting that slip away. What do you want to do?" "Prepare a room in the East Wing," Daniel ordered, grabbing his overcoat from the leather armchair near the nursery. Across the city, Sienna was struggling to unlock the door to her rundown apartment in South Boston. The deadbolt was jammed again. She finally kicked the bottom of the door, forcing it open, and stepped into the cramped, dimly lit living room. She froze. Sitting on her cheap, faded floral sofa was Daniel Corvino. Rocco stood by the window, his massive frame blocking the only fire escape. Sienna's purse slipped from her shoulder, hitting the linoleum floor with a dull thud. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs, her mind screaming at her to run, but her legs refused to move. "Miss Brooks?" Daniel said smoothly, steepling his fingers. He looked entirely out of place in her dingy apartment, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than her rent for the entire year. "Please, sit down." How did you get in here?" Sienna breathed, her voice trembling. "The lock is inadequate," Daniel replied calmly. "You should have it replaced, especially with the kind of people currently looking for your brother." Sienna's blood turned to ice. "You know about Toby." "I know that Toby owes Declan Foley $50,000, Daniel said, his gaze piercing right through her. "I know that Foley's enforcers, the Kelly brothers, are currently searching the docks for him. And I know that if they find him, they will kill him, slowly." Tears stung Sienna's eyes. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, trying to stop the violent trembling taking over her body. "I don't have the money. I'm trying to get it, but I don't." She swallowed hard. "Are you here to collect for them?" Daniel let out a quiet, humorless scoff. "I do not work for Declan Foley. I am here to offer you a job." Sienna stared at him, bewildered. A job? Daniel leaned forward, the shadows of the room clinging to his sharp features. My daughter, Mia. You saw her tonight. Her mother was taken from us 8 months ago. Since then, she hasn't spoken a single word. Until she saw you? Daniel paused, a flicker of genuine vulnerability passing through his cold eyes before vanishing behind a wall of ice. I want you to come live at my estate. You will act as Mia's nanny. You will care for her, play with her, and encourage her to speak again. A nanny? Sienna whispered. But I don't have any qualifications. I'm just a waitress. You have the only qualification that matters, Daniel stated. Mia chose you. I can't just uproot my life and move into your house, Sienna argued, panic rising in her throat. She knew who the Corvino family was. Everyone in Boston did. Moving into his house meant stepping into the underworld, a place where people disappeared and bodies were never found. I have a life here. I have a job. You have a minimum wage job and a brother with a death sentence, Daniel corrected sharply. He stood up, towering over her. The sheer physical presence of the man was suffocating. Let me make the terms clear, Miss Brooks. You come to my estate. You care for my daughter. In exchange, Toby's debt to the Irish is erased. I will pay Foley myself. Your brother lives, and you will be paid a salary that will ensure you never have to serve veal Milanese to strangers ever again. And if I say no? Sienna asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel's expression hardened into a mask of pure lethality. I do not accept no when it comes to the welfare of my child. Pack your things. Rocco will assist you. It wasn't a job offer. It was a kidnapping wrapped in a gilded contract. Sienna looked at Rocco, who had already stepped forward, looming like a mountain of muscle and violence. She thought of Toby, foolish, reckless Toby, bleeding out in some alleyway by the docks. Okay, she whispered, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I'll pack. An hour later, Sienna was sitting in the back of a bulletproof Maybach, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. She had packed her life into 2 duffel bags. When they passed through the massive iron gates of the Corvino estate, Sienna felt like a prisoner entering a high-security fortress. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with attack dogs. She was escorted into the grand foyer, a space of sweeping marble staircases and crystal chandeliers. An older woman named Maria, the housekeeper, quickly ushered Sienna to the east wing. This will be your room, Miss Brooks, Maria said, opening a heavy oak door to reveal a bedroom larger than Sienna's entire apartment. It was lavishly decorated in soft creams and golds, with a sprawling king-size bed and French doors leading out to a private balcony. Mia's nursery is right next door. The Don expects you to begin your duties tomorrow morning. Thank you, Sienna mumbled, dropping her bags on the plush carpet. Once Maria left, Sienna locked the door, though she knew it wouldn't stop these men if they wanted to get in. She walked over to her duffel bag to unpack her meager belongings. As she pulled out her winter coat, she felt a hard, unfamiliar lump in the front pocket. Frowning, Sienna reached inside and pulled out a cheap black burner phone. She hadn't put it there. Suddenly, the screen lit up, vibrating aggressively in her hand. A single text message glowed in the dim light of the bedroom. Sienna, it's Toby. I slipped this in your coat when I crashed at your place yesterday. Foley's men caught me. They know Corvino took you in. They say my debt is cleared. If you find Corvino's black ledger in his study and leave it by the east gate tomorrow night, if you don't do it, they are going to kill me. Please, Sienna, help me. Sienna stared at the glowing screen, the blood draining completely from her face. She looked toward the adjoining door that led to the little girl's nursery, and then back to the phone. She wasn't just a nanny trapped in a mafia boss's mansion anymore. She was a pawn caught between 2 warring syndicates, and her first assignment was to betray the most dangerous man in Boston. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the east wing, casting a warm, golden glow over the nursery. The room was a pastel wonderland, filled with imported plush toys, a hand-carved rocking horse, and shelves overflowing with children's books. Yet, for all its luxury, it had felt like a tomb for the past 8 months, until today. Sienna sat cross-legged on the thick Persian rug, holding a battered pop-up version of the Velveteen Rabbit. Mia sat opposite her, clutching the velvet rabbit Sienna had handed her at the restaurant the night before. The little girl was silent, but her dark, soulful eyes were locked onto Sienna's face, tracking her every expression. And so, the little rabbit became real. Sienna read softly, her voice taking on a gentle, animated lilt, because he was loved. Mia leaned forward, her tiny hand reaching out to touch the pop-up rabbit on the page. A soft, breathy sound escaped her lips. It wasn't a word, but it was a sound, a miraculous, deliberate vocalization. "That's right, sweetie," Sienna whispered, her heart swelling. She gently stroked Mia's dark curls. He became real. From the doorway, Daniel watched them. He stood perfectly still, his broad shoulders leaning against the oak frame. He had removed his suit jacket, his white dress shirt rolled up to the elbows, revealing the edge of dark, intricate tattoos creeping up his forearms. For a man who ruled Boston's criminal underworld with an iron fist, he looked entirely disarmed. Sienna glanced up and gasped, instinctively pulling her knees to her chest. She hadn't heard him approach. Men like Daniel Corvino didn't make a sound unless they wanted to. I didn't see you there, Mr. Corvino," Sienna stammered, scrambling to her feet and brushing imaginary lint from her jeans. Daniel, he corrected his voice, a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. He pushed off the doorframe and stepped into the room. The sheer size of him made the spacious nursery suddenly feel claustrophobic. "You got her to make a sound. Maria told me she actually laughed when you were feeding her oatmeal." "She has a beautiful laugh," Sienna said softly, her eyes darting nervously toward the heavy mahogany desk in Daniel's study, visible through the ajar doors down the hall. Every time she looked at him, the weight of the burner phone in her pocket felt like an anchor dragging her under. Daniel crouched down beside Mia. He reached out, his large, calloused hand, a hand that had ended lives, gently brushing the little girl's cheek. Mia didn't flinch, but she didn't look at him either. Her gaze remained fixed on Sienna. "She used to sing," Daniel murmured, a rare crack of vulnerability fracturing his stoic facade. Isabella would play the piano, and Mia would babble along. When the car exploded, he swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. It took the music with it. "I have given this city hell, trying to find the men who planted that bomb. I have burned warehouses to the ground," but none of it brought her voice back. He stood up, his piercing slate-grey eyes locking onto Sienna's green ones. The intensity in his stare was magnetic, almost intoxicating. "You brought it back, Sienna. In less than 24 hours. I don't know how, and I frankly don't care. You have my gratitude. And the Corvino family does not forget a debt." Guilt, sharp and acidic, clawed at Sienna's throat. She was looking at a grieving father, a man who was trusting her with his most precious possession. And tonight, she was going to betray him. "I'm just doing my job," Sienna whispered, unable to hold his gaze. The rest of the day was pure torture. Sienna played with Mia, fed her, and put her down for a nap, all while her mind raced with terrifying calculations. If I don't get the ledger, Toby dies. If I do get the ledger, Daniel will kill me. There was no way out. Declan Foley's ultimatum was a tightening noose. By midnight, the sprawling estate was plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. Outside, a violent summer thunderstorm had rolled in off the Atlantic, the rain lashing aggressively against the glass. Sienna slipped out of her bedroom. She wore dark leggings and a black sweater, her bare feet making no sound on the polished hardwood floors. She bypassed the sweeping staircase and crept down the secondary hallway toward Daniel's study. The security cameras were positioned at the entrances, but Toby had texted her the blind spots information he had somehow procured from his gambling buddies who ran low-level rackets. The study door was unlocked. Sienna slipped inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. The room smelled of expensive scotch, leather, and rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the massive mahogany desk in the center of the room. Sienna rushed to the desk, her hands trembling violently. She pulled open the heavy drawers. Nothing but files, fountain pens, and a loaded Glock 19. She let out a frustrated sob, dropping to her knees to examine the bottom panels. False bottom. Toby had mentioned a false bottom. She ran her fingertips frantically along the underside of the lowest drawer. Her nail caught on a small, concealed latch. She pressed it. With a soft click, the wood panel gave way, dropping a small, black, leather-bound notebook into her waiting hands. The Corvino ledger, the lifeblood of the syndicate. It contained names of corrupt judges, offshore accounts, and police captains on the payroll. Handing this to the Irish mob would dismantle Daniel's empire overnight. Sienna clutched the book to her chest, tears stinging her eyes. She thought of Mia's fragile smile. She thought of Daniel's rough voice thanking her. Then she thought of Toby's bruised, bloody face. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room. She shoved the ledger into the waistband of her leggings and slipped back out into the dark hallway, heading toward the east gate. The rain was a torrential downpour, cold and relentless, soaking Sienna to the bone the moment she stepped out of the servants' entrance. The east gate was located at the farthest edge of the property, obscured by thick lines of towering oak trees. Sienna navigated the muddy terrain, slipping twice, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She reached the wrought iron bars of the gate. On the other side, parked in the shadows of the access road, was a black SUV with its headlights off. 3 figures stood in the rain. Sienna approached the bars, gripping them with freezing fingers. Liam and Seamus Kelly, Foley's top enforcers, stepped forward. They were massive, brutal-looking men in heavy trench coats. Between them stood Toby. "Toby!" Sienna cried out over the roar of the storm. Toby looked up. He had a split lip and a bruised cheekbone, but he wasn't restrained. In fact, he looked remarkably calm for a man who was supposed to be facing execution. "Did you get it, Sienna?" Toby called out, stepping up to the iron bars. "The book? Do you have it?" Sienna pulled the black leather ledger from her sweater. "Let him go first. Step away from him, and I'll pass it through." Liam Kelly let out a dark, booming laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, that's not how this works." Toby sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. He didn't look terrified anymore. He looked annoyed. "Sienna, just open the gate. There's a manual override keypad on the pillar to your left. The code is 8492. Sienna froze. The rain plastered her auburn hair to her face. She stared at her brother, the ledger heavy in her hand. How do you know the override code?" Toby wouldn't look her in the eye. "Foley didn't just want the book, Si. Corvino's been encroaching on the docks. Foley wants him gone. All of him. He paid me 20 grand to give up the security details. I needed someone on the inside to physically open the gate. You were my ticket in." The betrayal hit Sienna with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of her lungs. Her own brother, the brother she had worked double shifts for, the brother she was risking her life to save, had sold her out to the Irish mob to orchestrate a hit on Daniel Corvino. "You set me up," Sienna breathed, stepping back from the gate. "You used me. They're going to kill everyone in that house. They'll kill Mia! Mia is collateral damage!" Toby yelled, his face twisting with sudden rage. "Corvino's a monster, Sienna. Just open the damn gate. If you don't, they'll blow it open and kill us both." Liam Kelly pulled a suppressed submachine gun from beneath his coat, pointing it directly through the bars at Sienna's chest. "Open it, lass. Now." Sienna looked at the gun. She looked at her cowardly brother. She thought of Daniel, the man who had ripped her from her life but offered her a chance to heal a broken child. She thought of Mia, sleeping safely in her nursery, completely unaware that monsters were gathering at the gates. Sienna gripped the black ledger tightly. "No," she said, her voice cutting clearly through the storm. Liam's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said no!" Sienna screamed at the top of her lungs, turning and sprinting back toward the estate. "Guards! Intruders! East Gate!" "Shoot her!" Toby shrieked, panic taking over. Twip, twip, twip! Bullets tore through the air, shredding the bark of the oak trees around her. Sienna dove behind a heavy stone planter, covering her head as stone fragments showered over her. An explosion rocked the ground. The Kelly brothers had attached a breaching charge to the lock mechanism. The wrought iron gate groaned and blew inward, tearing off its hinges. "Find the girl, get the book, and slaughter everyone else?" Liam roared, storming onto the Corvino grounds with Seamus and 3 other armed men piling out of the SUV. Sienna scrambled backward in the mud, clutching the ledger to her chest. Seamus spotted her and raised his weapon. Before he could pull the trigger, the darkness itself seemed to erupt. A high-powered rifle cracked from the second-floor balcony of the estate. Seamus Kelly's head snapped back in a spray of crimson, his massive body crumpling instantly to the wet grass. Floodlights blazed to life, blinding the Irish mobsters. Daniel Corvino stepped out from the tree line to Sienna's right, looking like the devil incarnate. He wore no coat, the rain soaking his white shirt, a customized Sig Sauer in his right hand. Rocco and Matteo flanked him, assault rifles raised. "Kill them all," Daniel ordered, his voice colder than the rain. The courtyard turned into a slaughterhouse. The Corvino guards unleashed a barrage of suppressing fire. The Irish mobsters never stood a chance. 2 of them were cut down before they could even aim. Liam Kelly managed to get off a wild burst of fire before Rocco stepped forward and put 3 rounds into his chest. Through the chaos, Sienna saw Toby scrambling away in the mud, trying to run back toward the street. He didn't look back at her once. He just ran, disappearing into the storm. The gunfire ceased abruptly. The only sound left was the torrential rain and the hissing of the broken floodlights. 4 bodies lay bleeding out on the manicured lawn. Sienna sat frozen behind the stone planter, shaking so violently she could barely breathe. She looked down at her hands, smeared with mud and holding the black ledger. Heavy, methodical footsteps approached her. Daniel stood over her. The Sig Sauer was still in his hand, smoke curling lazily from the barrel, mixing with the rain. His chest heaved slightly, his eyes entirely black in the shadows. He looked down at the shivering, terrified woman. Then, his gaze dropped to her hands. He saw his ledger. The absolute stillness that washed over Daniel was more terrifying than the gunfire. The protective fury that had driven him out into the storm vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow betrayal. The puzzle pieces clicked into place in his mind: the open gate, the Irish mob, and the woman holding the key to his destruction. "Daniel, please," Sienna sobbed, looking up at him, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "I can't explain. I didn't open the gate. I didn't." Daniel didn't say a word. He reached down, his large hand gripping her bicep with bruising force, and hauled her roughly to her feet. He snatched the ledger from her trembling hands and shoved it into his pocket. "Rocco," Daniel barked, not taking his dead eyes off Sienna, "clean up this mess. Matteo, double the guard on Mia's room." "Daniel, you have to listen to me," Sienna pleaded, her voice cracking as he began to drag her back toward the sprawling, dark mansion. "You had one job, Sienna," Daniel whispered, his voice dangerously soft as he pulled her out of the rain and into the sterile light of the servants' hallway. He pinned her against the cold wall, his forearm pressing against her collarbone, trapping her. "I brought you into my home to heal my daughter, and you brought a war to my front door." "It was my brother," she cried out. "They were going to kill him, but I didn't give them the book. I screamed to warn your guards." Daniel's face was mere inches from hers. He studied her wet, terrified face, searching for the lie. He wanted to kill her. It was the absolute law of his world. Betrayal was met with death. But as he looked at her, he remembered Mia's laugh. He remembered the way Sienna had read to his broken child. He pulled away from her, his jaw locked tight. "Lock her in the basement holding cell," Daniel ordered an approaching guard, turning his back on her. "I'll deal with her tomorrow." The basement holding cell of the Corvino estate was a stark, brutal contrast to the opulent floors above. It was a windowless room of cold concrete and a heavy, reinforced steel door. Sienna sat shivering on a thin cot, hugging her knees tightly to her chest. The adrenaline of the shootout had faded, leaving behind a hollow, agonizing grief. Her own brother had sold her to the slaughter. The heavy lock mechanism clanked loudly, echoing in the cramped space. The steel door swung open, and Daniel stepped into the dim, flickering, fluorescent light. He had changed out of his wet clothes into a black Henley and dark jeans. In his hand, he held a sleek digital tablet. His face was unreadable, a stone mask that gave away none of the lethal fury he had unleashed in the courtyard. "I reviewed the perimeter security footage," Daniel stated, his voice a low, even timbre that completely lacked the hostility from earlier. The surveillance microphones picked up the audio at the gate. Sienna looked up, her green eyes red and swollen from crying. She didn't say a word, bracing herself for whatever punishment the Don of Boston had decided for her. "You had the ledger in your hands," Daniel continued, stepping closer, the sheer physical presence of him dominating the small room. "Your brother gave you the override code to the gate. You had every opportunity to walk away. You could have handed Liam Kelly the book, cleared Toby's debt, and vanished into the night with your life." He stopped at the edge of her cot, staring down at her. "Why didn't you?" "I couldn't," Sienna whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. She looked up, meeting his terrifying slate-grey eyes without flinching. "Toby told me they wanted to wipe you out. If I opened that gate, they would have flooded the estate. They would have killed Mia. I couldn't let them hurt her. Or you." Daniel stared at her, the thick, icy walls he had built around his heart beginning to fracture. A man like him did not inspire genuine loyalty. He commanded obedience through fear and leverage. Yet this civilian, this waitress, with absolutely everything to lose, had stood in front of loaded guns in a torrential downpour to protect his blood. Before he could speak, Matteo appeared in the doorway, his suit still damp from the rain. "Boss," Matteo said quietly, "we tracked down Toby Brooks. He was trying to board a Greyhound bus heading for Montreal. Foley's crew is scattered and completely compromised. My men have Toby in the van out front." Sienna's breath hitched. "Toby..." Daniel didn't look at Matteo. He kept his eyes locked firmly on Sienna. He sold you to the Irish, Sienna. He priced your life, and the life of my daughter, at $20,000 and a clean slate. What do you want me to do with him? The absolute power of life and death sat heavily in the damp basement air. Sienna thought of the years she had spent shielding Toby, working double shifts to pay his debts, and making endless excuses for his toxic behavior. And then she thought of the bullets tearing through the oak trees, aimed directly at the nursery where a little girl finally felt safe. Sienna stood up, her posture straightening as a newfound resolve washed over her. "Tell him he doesn't have a sister anymore," she said, her voice eerily calm and resolute. "Ban him from Boston. If he ever comes back, he's your problem, Daniel. Not mine." Daniel's lips parted slightly in surprise, the expression quickly replaced by a look of profound, silent respect. He gave a sharp nod to his underboss. "You heard her. Put him on a freighter to Europe. If he ever sets foot in this city again, put him in the harbor." Matteo nodded and vanished down the corridor. Daniel closed the remaining distance between them. He reached out, his large knuckles gently grazing the bruised, mud-streaked skin of Sienna's cheek. The touch was startlingly tender for a man whose hands were built for violence. "You risked everything for a child who isn't yours," Daniel murmured, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate whisper. "She chose me," Sienna replied softly, leaning slightly into his warm touch, the exhaustion finally catching up to her. "And I chose her." "And me?" Daniel asked, his thumb tracing her jawline, his eyes searching hers for the truth. "I screamed to warn you, didn't I?" she breathed. Daniel exhaled a breath he felt he'd been holding for 8 long months. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her firmly against his chest. Sienna buried her face in his shoulder, the last of her tears soaking his shirt, finally realizing she was entirely safe in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. The next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the estate bathed in bright, crisp sunlight. Sienna sat in the sunlit dining room, Mia perched happily on her lap, eating a bowl of fresh blueberries. Daniel walked in, dressed in a tailored suit, pouring himself a cup of black coffee. Mia looked up, her dark eyes bright and full of life. She pointed a sticky little finger directly at Daniel. Duh. Daniel froze, the coffee cup trembling slightly in his grip. He looked across the table at Sienna, who beamed with a radiant, tearful smile. The ghost of Boston was gone, replaced by a father who had finally found his family's voice. The underworld still whispered the name Daniel Corvino with absolute terror, but within the iron gates of the Western estate, the shadows had finally receded. Sienna stepped out of a life of desperation into one of fierce, unconditional loyalty. A single word from a traumatized child had bridged 2 entirely different worlds, forging an unbreakable empire built not on fear and bloodshed, but on the enduring power of family.